For decades, patients were told their sadness was caused by a chemical imbalance, and a pill could fix it.
Depression may be related to an imbalance of natural chemicals between nerve cells in the brain. Prescription Zoloft works to correct this imbalance.
But today, I'm speaking with a psychiatrist who dared to say that story was never true. This is Dr. Joanna Moncrieff, an academic who risked her career, her reputation, and the approval of her own colleagues to expose the truth behind psychiatry's most popular myth. What she reveals in this interview should worry us all. The pressure to stay silent, the fear of losing professional standing, and the human cost of telling patients a comforting lie. We talk about what happens when a doctor stops believing the scripts and starts asking deeper questions. Why are millions still being prescribed drugs we know don't fix any known brain abnormalities? Why do so few speak out? This isn't just about science. It's about ethics, power, and what happens when medicine forgets its first promise: to do no harm. Dr. Joanna Moncrieff, thank you so much for agreeing to come on and speak with our audience.
It's a pleasure, Joseph. Lovely to talk to you.
So to jump right into this, you've recently come out with a book, a great book, Chemically Imbalanced here, and it made a lot of waves in the media. And it was talking about how essentially the serotonin theory of depression really didn't hold water. And I guess my question to you about this would be, if this chemical imbalance theory of depression has been, discredited, or that it doesn't hold any weight, why are medications still prescribed to millions of people each year as if they correct a brain defect?
Great question. And it's a particularly good question because the medical profession, at least the sort of academic part of it, have known for a long time that there's no evidence or no compelling evidence of a serotonin abnormality or of any other chemical abnormality in people with depression, and therefore that antidepressants can't be correcting said abnormality. And so why do they keep on prescribing them? And they would say it's because they work. I would say it's because it's because the use of drugs like antidepressants satisfies various interests. Obviously, one of the interests it satisfies is that of the pharmaceutical industry to make money, to make profit, but it also satisfies the interests, or maybe I should say the needs, of the psychiatric profession to feel like they are real medical doctors and have a real medical treatment, a sophisticated, targeted treatment to offer for one of the common problems that they are faced with. And then, of course, people, the public in general, are often attracted by the idea that there might be a simple chemical solution for the feelings of distress and discomfort that they're going through. So it has some sort of popular appeal as well. Although on that note, I should say that actually in the past, people used to be cautious about using chemicals to manage their emotions. And the pharmaceutical industry launched campaigns in the 1990s deliberately aimed at changing people's minds, at whittling down that natural caution that people had about the use of chemicals that affect the brain. So I think the reasons why antidepressants have continued to be prescribed is because of this combination of factors, because they satisfy these various interests, and therefore any research that contradicts the idea that they might be useful or beneficial is resisted or ignored for as long as it can be.
What I want to ask you about is something you said right at the beginning. This has been dismissed by the medical community for quite some time. I have to say that's not the experience that I've heard from the patients coming to me. In fact, most of them would say, my doctors told me that, this is genetic, or, there's some biochemical problem in here. And so it doesn't seem like that's the case. How could it be two things at the same time, dismissed by the medical community, but every week people are coming to me believing that they have essentially a chemical imbalance or a genetic brain problem.
So
how does that make sense?
So no, you're absolutely right, and that's a really good point. So I believe that people have been continued to be told that depression is due to a chemical imbalance and that antidepressants correct that imbalance, often explicitly, but sometimes it will be an implicit message, oh dear, yes, this must be a medical condition and you need a drug treatment for it, and no other if no other explanation is given, but people are told that, they will generally assume, given all the propaganda that there has been over the years, that that this drug is being given them to correct a chemical imbalance. But many people have been told that explicitly by their doctors. But the point I was trying to make is that the research community, the academic community, have known that there is no good evidence to support this idea for a long time. In fact, in 2005, two academics published a paper quoting a whole load of medical experts who acknowledged that there was no evidence to support the serotonin theory of depression, and that made caused some attention, grabbed some attention from the media at the time, and leaders of the psychiatric establishment at that time commented that, oh yes, of course, we know there's no evidence for this at the moment, but we assume that something like this must be the case, and therefore one of them said it is a useful metaphor that we tell to patients. And subsequently, leading psychiatrists such as Ronald Pease in the US have written several times that the idea of a chemical imbalance has not been demonstrated, but may be something that is told to patients as a useful shorthand for explaining what he thinks doctors believe is the case with antidepressants, even if it's not been proven or demonstrated. So this, of course, is enormously dishonest. This is really leaders of the psychiatric profession saying that it's okay to mislead patients. We believe that depression has some biological roots. Therefore, we assume that they'll be discovered eventually. Therefore, we're just going to let our patients believe that they have been established already. That's basically what they're saying. And I think that's what, and because those people haven't stood up and said publicly, no, actually, this theory that depression is caused by a chemical imbalance has not been established, has not been proven, because they've not said that outright in public. Many doctors, as well as patients, have continued to believe that actually this is proven, and therefore, practicing doctors pass this idea on to their patients.
How does something like this happen? Well, actually, I think I came, I went through, when I was going through school to become a psychiatrist, what I heard a lot about was BDNF. There's no chemical imbalance, but maybe there's something about these antidepressants that are fixing BDNF. It's brain-derived neurotrophic factor or some other biological agent, or we've identified circuits in the brain that are, maybe involved in depression. Are you saying that there's no, just to put aside the serotonin thing, that there is no other targets there, that have been shown to be abnormal in people who have depression, whether it's brain circuits or other chemicals like BDNF?
I absolutely am saying that.
Okay.
There are many theories about possible biological factors that might give rise to depression. such as a serotonin imbalance or a deficiency of some other brain chemical like noradrenaline, but also, as you say, something to do with BDNF or neural circuitry. There are hormonal hypotheses. There are all sorts of different theories or hypotheses. And the reason that looking at the serotonin theory was important is because that's one of the theories that has been most thoroughly researched. And we didn't find consistent evidence of a link between serotonin imbalance and depression. None of these other theories have been established either. There may be one or two positive studies. There are often also one or two negative studies. There is no other theory no other biological factor has been definitively linked with depression. And I think I think what you were saying illustrates a really important point that the psychiatric establishment seems to be obsessed by this idea of that antidepressants and other drugs of this sort must target some underlying biological abnormality. They just must do that. And therefore, there's this endless quest to look for something that might be the target of their effects. And because they're so focused on this completely mistaken presumption and completely unevidenced presumption, they are ignoring the fact that these are drugs that change our normal brain chemistry, that change the normal state of the brain. And I know you've discussed my drug and disease-centered models of drug action in previous podcasts, but I think this just really nicely illustrates that because the psychiatric establishment is so wedded to the disease-centered model of drug action, that's all it can think of. All it can think of is trying to find the biological substrates of depression. And therefore, it is completely ignored. It is completely neglected to research what antidepressants actually do, how they actually change the brain, change the normal state of the brain, and what the consequences are of doing that.
So just to recap for new listeners here, what Joanna's talking about is there's two different lenses that you could look at at how psychiatric drugs work. One is that they work on some underlying biological deficit and they're fixing something, and then the downstream effects of that result in improved mood or symptoms. And the other side is a drug-centered model where they mask symptoms that people are experiencing, and that's how they deliver their therapeutic effect, with the distinction being, one is getting at a root cause, presumably underlying problems, and the other one is essentially masking symptoms. And she's talked a lot about, the best lens to view these medications through, the most accurate and correct, is a drug-centered model. And so, and just
to add to that, maybe Joseph, can I just add to that? So I think it's important to say that the drug-centered model, as you say, is this idea that drugs may occasionally, because sometimes I don't even think they do that, but may occasionally mask symptoms because of the mental alterations they produce, and but the important thing to recognize is they produce these mental alterations in anyone who takes them. Because of the way that they alter the normal state of the brain. So it's just like having a drink of alcohol. Alcohol changes our normal mental states, and those changes can occasionally can be superimposed onto our underlying feelings, so that if we're very unhappy and go out and get drunk, we may temporarily forget our unhappiness. And we have a phrase in English, called drowning our sorrows, to express that situation. So I'm not saying that all psychiatric drugs are exactly of the same sort as alcohol. Obviously, they're they consist of lots of different sort of chemical compounds which have different sorts of effects on the brain, and therefore they produce different sorts of mental alterations. But many of them will dampen down and numb emotions to one degree or another, and therefore will often, as you say, mask people's underlying feelings of distress.
So coming back to what you said before, you said the psychiatric establishment is obsessed with finding these underlying biological imbalances. Why though? Why not just take on a drug-centered model and just say, yes, we're using these drugs, to cover these symptoms or mask these symptoms. Why